series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Monday, June 11th, 2018. We have a lot to get into. Just want to say first that Friday we attempted to do a show, and I don't know what went wrong with the audio, but we had some major glitches, which would have made for just a terrible show. Nobody would have listened to it if we tried to air what we recorded. So we had to just basically junk it. Yeah, you were warning me there, John. I thought it was happening again. But we had to junk it. And just to let you guys know, we did record about 45 minutes of the show, 40 minutes of the show, I think, before it was cut off. But we didn't have enough time to... And it was a long week, so we said, you know what? We had about 5 minutes to play with to get an hour show done and get it up within that 5 minutes. And
we almost made it, Joe. We almost made it.
Work.
We had like 5 minutes the other direction. We could have banged out. We could have started from the beginning and banged it out again, just you and I. If we just had that, about 7 minutes maybe.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. So, not that we didn't try. We did try. We just didn't get a show up. And that show we had brought Dr. Travis Jackson, but we're going to try again this week. Yeah. On Friday, and hopefully we can make that happen. So that show still is coming. Now, I guess the big news today, what is front and center is in just a matter of hours, President Trump will be meeting with Kim Jong-un of North Korea in a historic meeting, an historic summit is what they're calling it. And on the front of Drudge right now it says, Trump Kim for 2 hours. The world awaits. And we see this is historic, and it's also a happy birthday, Mr. President. Trump is presented with a birthday cake as he meets with Singapore Prime Minister and reveals U.S. will offer unique security guarantees to North Korea during a single meeting and working lunch with Kim. Now, I was wondering about how they were going to do the security, how these two were going to meet. Is it going to just be them? Is there going to be other aides with them, other personnel? And that's all very interesting. And there are a few facts we can talk about and go over. But apparently, Dennis Rodman will not be in the meeting, and rightfully so. He should not be there. And maybe one point he'll be, part of it, but not in the initial individual meeting. But either way, what could come of the meeting? And is this, will the media give the president credit for what he is doing by being able to bring North Korea to the table and have some kind of diplomatic relationship under where they can talk and denuclearize the North Korean nation, and maybe North Korea could become part of the world community? I think that's the hope. But, what will that translate to for the citizens of North Korea? That's the big question. And that's what I think really is the big problem as well. Wow.
Wow. Seriously, Joe, to say this is a historic event would certainly be accurate. Just a quick rundown of where we've been. Of course, 1953, we signed an armistice, effectively a ceasefire with the North Koreans. After 2.5, almost 3 years of what many call the Forgotten War, which is the Korean conflict. Joe, of course, the first time that our country, under the Truman and Eisenhower administrations, got away with calling an obvious war a police action, and that set the tone for the second half of the 20th century, where and just a couple of decades later, we got embroiled in Vietnam, and then we, a couple decades after that, we got into the ongoing Iraq saga. So set a bad precedent, in my opinion, Joe, for militarized projection of force and calling it talk about the ultimate euphemism, a police action. Police action is when a few cruisers show up at your front door because people are yelling in the middle of the night. What we got into was a war. But that being said, I watched an interesting piece. I've mentioned this YouTube channel before, and I like to say it once in a while because I hope some of our listeners enjoy it as much as I do. It's called Today I Found Out, and the host is a British man named Simon Whistler. And there's just so much fun stuff on that channel. If you've got like 15-minute coffee break and you want to take your head out of the game, Today I Found Out is a great channel. And Joe, last week I watched a piece leading up to this historic summit about an interesting occurrence that happened in I believe it was the 1970s, but our listeners might need to correct me on that. And what it was, long story short, is right on the demilitarized zone, Joe, there was a tree, a really big tree, like a big willow tree, 50 plus feet tall. And there's a bridge that, like a little footbridge, 20, 30 foot long bridge, that abridged South Korea to North Korea. So the United Nations had observation posts all along the DMZ. So there were three parties involved: the UN, the South Korean Army, and the North Korean Army, of course, with an infusion of U.S. military presence, primarily the U.S. Army there as well. And the two sides, the South Koreans and the North Koreans, they needed to cut down this tree, Joe, or they needed to at least trim it back because it was impeding proper observation from the U.S. South Korean side over to the North Korean side in what is probably, and Joe, I'll bounce this off you as soon as I'm done with the story. It's probably one of the most contentious pieces of real estate on the planet, the demilitarized zone between these two warring, albeit at a ceasefire, factions. So they sent a tree chopping party out to cut down this tree, and it consisted of South Korean soldiers and a small contingent of U.S. Army as well. And the North Koreans had agreed to the specific time, the number of personnel. I mean, they had to get it nailed down to the number of chainsaws, Joe, that they were going to bring to this area literally right on the border, 1 foot North Korea, 1 foot south, and chop this tree back. Well, the South Koreans and the U.S. military personnel got to work on the tree, and about 10 or 12 North Koreans with some 3 or 4 foot long sticks, like some combat baton type things, Joe, they ran across the bridge and they beat up the South Koreans and the U.S. Army personnel, and not one but 2 officers in the United States Army were killed. They were bludgeoned to death. And because this tree was in the middle of, as I said at the beginning, it impeded the view. The United Nations over in their observation post couldn't see that these 2 U.S. Army officers were being bludgeoned to death. So that's how the North Koreans got away with it. So a big brouhaha went down, and I think it was, and forgive me if I've got my history a little off here because I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but I think it was the Nixon administration who had to figure out what to do. This became, Joe, the cutting down of a tree became an international issue. Bombers, the Soviets put bombers up in the air. The United States put bombers up in the air. Nuclear armed bombers. This became like a flashpoint over a tree trimming. And ultimately what happened was the U.S. Sent personnel across the bridge in force, like 4 or 5 times the number of people, a couple of machine gun units, etc. And they chopped that tree to the ground. And so today, where that tree once stood is a plaque that commemorates the death of the U.S. Army personnel and the South Korean, North Korean conflict. And that's there to this day. That YouTube channel, again, is called Today I Found Out. And really a worthwhile video, Joe, to take a look at, especially with President Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un today. I told that story because it encapsulates how difficult these relations have been, Joe, the last 70 years.
John, did you see over the weekend the liberally insane media and this picture of the G7 leaders where G7 leaders
yes.
were okay. So Donald Trump is sitting
hey,
at this
second.
table,
Did you like
right?
my story?
No, I was just fine. I mean, I already had this set aside to talk about, right?
Hey, at least you're being honest. Go ahead, man.
I had this set aside to talk about, but I just came across it, a different tweet from Bloomberg that I found interesting. But there's a picture out there of Donald Trump sitting down, and you have Angela Merkel, you have John Bolton, all these people standing up, and it looks like they're yelling at President Trump. Well, and the media ran with this one picture, but Bloomberg put out that viral photo of Angela Merkel and Donald Trump at G7 ? Other angles of the same shot tell a different story, because the photo they show at first and the photo that went viral looks like Merkel is yelling at Donald Trump or very frustrated. It looks like all these world leaders are just like bullying him, and he looks like he's putting his foot down, just saying no. I'm not going to give in to anything. I don't want to hear anything you crazy lunatics have to say. But there are other shots where it looks like they're having more of a discussion. I mean, one of the shots shows Merkel's face almost like it's has a disgusted look on her face. Well, another one, just a few moments later that they don't show you, shows her smiling. But the reaction by the insane Trump haters and the insane media are classic. I mean, they did exactly what you'd think they would do with it, with captions of the picture like, it looks like Angela Merkel's a mom setting her young child straight, and just ridiculous things like that. But interesting, very interesting, not surprising, but we see this all the time. Remember the media's attempted tricking of the public, showing President Trump dumping a whole box of fish food in Japan when they only showed the other leader fooling with a spoon, throwing the food into the thing and saying, "Oh, Trump's so ridiculous and he breaks all traditions." But what they didn't show is the whole video where the Japanese president did it first. And we've seen countless examples of this. We just saw another one just a few weeks ago where he was talking about MS-13 gang members as animals. And the media ran with the story that he called all immigrants animals. And on and on and on and on. We see this same blueprint over and over and over. So it's no surprise that the insane liberal media ran with, took a picture out of context and put their own spin on it and tried to discredit the president. It never works. It always blows up. Every time they try to do this, they get shown for what they are.
Well, it made a good meme, Joe, and that one of the pictures I'm sure you're referring to is going to probably go down as a classic, particularly in this meme-driven society that we seem to find ourselves in. And that's the one where on the left-hand side of the frame, you've got Angela Merkel appearing to scowl very sourly at the president, and then you've got the president sitting. She's behind a table, leaning forward on both hands in a very aggressive sort of posture. President Trump is seated with his arms crossed in that classic Trumponian, if you will, crossing of the arms, and he's got kind of a smug smile on his face, almost like a Dennis the Menace kind of smile, and that one certainly burned around social media.
Did I lose you? John, I think I lost you. But yeah, it does make for a good meme, and I have not seen many of those, so I don't know exactly what it is that which one you're talking about, which meme, but you'll have to show me when we get in studio. And John, if you can hear me, you're going to want to reconnect. I don't know what happened, but we lost your audio, and we're going to have to try to reconnect to get it back. But another piece that went kind of viral, is getting a lot of press over the weekend, is this Robert De Niro at the Tony Awards. Now, I got a clip for you, and we can play this clip since we have to reconnect with John. But we can play this clip. This is Fox and Friends this morning talking about and showing what Robert De Niro said during a Tony Award that was met with, it was a profanity-laced tirade that was met with applause at the 2018 Tony Awards in New York City. This is from Fox and Friends this morning. Here we go.
All right, he just keeps getting lower and lower. I'm not kidding. Robert De Niro, probably a good actor, using last night's platform at the Tony Awards to leave the prompter to say this about the president.
I'm going to say one thing. Trump. It's no longer down with Trump. It's Trump.
Good job. Another reason not to watch Meet the Parents or Meet the Parents 2. Here to weigh in is our panel, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, who I've met in person, and Democratic strategist Antoine Seawright, who I've yet to meet in person.
I'm surprised you still have me back.
I know, it's unbelievable. Antoine, real quick, is this over the top even for you?
I probably wouldn't use the choice of Sunday school words that he used last night. However, I do think he speaks to the frustration, anger of a lot of people in this country on the left and the right. But if you are if you are surprised or pissed off about the language he used, then you have to look at the president of the United States and some of the language he's used, calling NFL players SOBs, S-hole countries.
All right, we're going to cut that clip off there. I don't even know who that guy was that was commenting there, but you heard what Robert De Niro said. He said, F Trump. It's no longer down with Trump. It's F Trump. Now, this is getting some interesting reaction across the media spectrum, and we're going to go over a few of these reactions just to show you. And what's interesting about it is because these people maybe on the left are starting to catch on, or maybe just today are taking a different angle when looking at it. But on Morning Joe, MSNBC host Joe Scarborough expressed his disappointment with Robert De Niro on Monday after the actor said F Trump during the Tony Awards Sunday night. And it goes on from there. The program decided not to play De Niro's clip from the awards, instead opting to show a tweet from Steve Schmidt, another MSNBC political analyst, criticizing the actor's actions. The greatest actor of his generation could have said something important. He could have defended liberal democracy, freedom of speech and expression. He could have stood for decency. Instead, he strengthened Trump's hand by mirroring the debasement of our culture. Be better. And it goes on from there to talk about, if people who applauded De Niro's statement last night don't understand that they're helping Donald Trump's reelection every time they do something like that, and they don't understand that, Scarborough said. John, do we have you back?
Yes, indeed. I don't know what. I apologize, Joe, to the listeners. I don't know what happened, but apparently my internet crashed. So
yeah,
we'll deal with that after the show. I don't know. There was somebody out doing yard work kind of near where the wires come in, but who knows? Anyhow, I was able to reconnect on my cell, so if the audio is not quite the same quality, again, I apologize.
Well, no, it sounds fine. And what I did is I just played a clip from last night's Tony Awards where Robert De Niro said F Trump and got a standing ovation, and then we switched over to a Daily Caller article of Joe Scarborough, Morning Joe this morning, taking Robert De Niro to task, saying, what you said and the audience's applause of your statement is going to get Donald Trump reelected. And this is what Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough are saying this morning. So I don't know.
They may be right.
Well, I don't know. And it is it's just a toxic environment, political environment out there. And everybody does want us to think along the terms of left and right and pro-Trump and anti-Trump, because that's where they are seeing the most division. They try to do this with the trans movement, but there's not enough trans people out there. There's not enough homosexuals out there. It's a very small percentage of the population, but a much larger section of the population has disagreeing ideas and ideologies on politics, and they're going to divide and they're going to push those divisions even further as much as they can. So when we see these polar opposites, the Obamas to the Trumps, the populists to the totalitarian leftists, they're doing this for a reason. This isn't in order to engage everyone into a political battle, into a political division, which will divide people rather than bring them together to address the problems. But can you unite with the other side? Can you unite with an ideology of evil, an ideology that supports gender-bending children, an ideology that supports the massacre of children and communism? Can you unite with that? No. And should you? No. Absolutely not.
Not only that, but we're having a hard time, Joe, uniting our side right now. And I know that when you want to get into it, I wanted to speak for a moment about the divisive tactics that are being employed, particularly the last couple of months, but it was certainly pronounced throughout last week, Joe, with the whole Tucson thing. I don't want to get into Tucson today because I think we've beat that. That's a dead horse right now. More information is coming, by the way. I spoke with some of the principals involved over the weekend. But what I would like to talk about is this division. So let's wrap up the De Niro thing first. On Twitter, I tweeted out early this morning, Taxi Driver is ancient history. That movie was made, 40-something years ago? It was the early 1970s. It's kind of the film that put De Niro on the map. And then, some of his big films like Heat in the 90s, Goodfellas in the early 90s, Casino in the mid-90s, those films are 25 years old. So De Niro has long ago peaked in his talent stack and his popularity. What he comes across looking like now is a curmudgeonly old man who lacks the vitality. He doesn't look like the robust, gangster, chiseled jaw type guy that he was, Joe, 25 years ago. He looks like just an angry, diminished old man. And I put hashtag capital F De Niro, which was a albeit a somewhat edgy response, but that hashtag was already trending. So I wasn't the person who came up with it. But, a lot of these Hollywood types, Joe, I don't think that they really consider any type of political strategy when they pop off and say the things they do. I think that they're just running, Joe, on hyper emotionalism. And that kind of segues into just a couple minute long conversation that I want to have about the hyper emotional approach to news stories. Some of the vitriol that dropped on my desk last week, simply by being part of an organization trying our best to report on a very convoluted, complicated, and Joe, what turned out, as you and I discussed on Saturday, to be essentially a story that started with a single lie. And of course, we know what happens when you go down the path of telling a lie. One lie begets 100, begets 1,000, because lies have a way of avalanching on you, where you have to continue to lie more and more and more. You have to lie exponentially just to keep the lie from being discovered, Joe. So I don't know if you want to get into that now, or if you had a little bit more news you want to cover, but I'll hand it back to you.
No, and I don't know, John, I just got a message from you on Skype that you probably sent right when you disconnected it, and I don't know if that beep was a text I sent you right when you disconnected, but that'd be weird if it was, because that was several minutes ago. But yeah, this whole Tucson thing, I don't have all the information in front of me, but there are a lot of problems. As we said last week, I was very hesitant, especially even off air, I did not buy the story that we were given. Everything seems so weird, and it turns out, the place where the skull or remains were 26 plus miles, 41-minute drive from the location of this camp, and there was no actual bloody knife, and there's all this disinformation, and they tried to dupe Craig Sawyer and his organization. They tried to dupe the alternative media. And this is how things like Pizzagate is now said to be debunked because of one person's actions, whether, intentional or... I find it very hard to believe that guy who shot shots at Comet Ping Pong did not do so out of a paid... infiltrator type position. I have a hard time believing that he did that on his own, and it was done for the purposes of trying to discredit, and it did discredit what was known as Pizzagate. Now they're trying to do the same thing, and there's no doubt there's human trafficking going on in Tucson, Arizona. It goes on everywhere in satanic ritual abuse. But these people are protected not only by people in positions of power who have dark souls, but also the power of darkness itself. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of prayer to expose these things. We have seen news today, massive online pedophilia ring busted by cops, up to 70,000 members, thought to be the world's largest, uncovered by police. This, according to a European police agency, Europol, said in a statement, Operation Rescue had identified 670 suspects and that 230 abused children in 30 countries had been taken to safety. More are expected to be found. And then it said so far 184 people have been arrested, and investigations in some countries were continuing. Most of the detained are suspected of direct involvement in sexually abusing children. These include teachers, police officers, scout leaders. AP reported one Spaniard who worked at a summer youth camp is suspected of abusing some 100 children over 5 years. So they're saying this is one of the biggest pedophilia rings ever in history that has been brought down. Yet what news organizations are leading with these stories? Do you see it on CNN? Do you see it on Fox News? Is it being talked about by the major talk radio people? No. And why is that? This is just a huge problem, but for the people who thinks or says it does not exist in any organized fashion, go read about the latest bust where 5 Americans among 184 arrested, 230 abused children saved and taken into safe custody. So, you can continue with the lies that this stuff doesn't exist. You can continue to use criminals to try to further conspiracy theories in order to debunk them, to discredit the alternative media who want to report on these kind of things. And it's going to continue. And people are going to lose credibility because of it. But we have to have discernment. We have to pray for that discernment. And we have to use that discernment when sharing, reporting, or, people get so emotional. John, you talked about this. We were talking about this before the show, how somebody's passionate about a subject like helping kids, from child trafficking, sex trafficking. And many people think they can do that from just behind their computer, that somehow they can, save these children from these kind of situations. And some of that can be true when you're talking about researching and making connections and whatnot. But when you have a group of, we'll say 1 million people out there who are constantly waiting and are set up by movements like this Q, where they expect all these big name people, the John Podestas and Hillary Clintons, to be marched to the gallows, caught on tape, messing around with children. And maybe that is true to some extent, but that's never gonna come out. Never. And it's unfortunate.
Joe, I'm sorry, finish your thought.
No, just to say it's unfortunate.
We have a little bit of delay because I'm on my phone. But
it should come out. And it's unfortunate that it won't. But, and we got to pray that it does. Unless Americans do what they need to do to take this country back, and I can't even explain what that is on air, then it's never going to happen. It can't wait. You can't rely on President Trump. You can't rely on somebody who may or may not exist, named Q, or the group of people, or the PSYOP, CIA warriors, whatever you want to call it. You can't sit behind a computer and expect that you're going to, make a difference and not make a difference, but in somehow be able to, open an investigation and gather the evidence and close the book on these people. It's great that we can share information and wake people up with the information. That's absolutely what we need to continue to do. But to think, like what Craig Sawyer's doing, he's putting his organization into action, setting up the sting operations, assisting law enforcement. That's the kind of stuff that's needed, more so than all the online clickbait stuff, John. And you said it best earlier. People are being pulled like puppets, played like puppets on their emotional strings and passions. And it can create an environment where disinformation is being thrown around as truth in order to, one, discredit a number of people and organizations, and 2, to continue to further divide the movement of people who are looking into this stuff. Because some people say, if you don't believe the Tucson, Arizona thing, you're a pedophile yourself. And we can't have that Joe, mindset.
That's how far this thing has run amok. And so some lessons learned this past week. And when I say lessons learned, please understand, listeners, I'm not admonishing any of you about lessons learned. I'm talking about lessons learned by me, or perhaps by our platform, the Hagmann Report, and our 3 shows therein. I borrowed this from Lionel Nation on YouTube. He did some commentary a week ago, this past weekend, Joe, so 8-9 days ago. And it's kind of a silly analogy. It's kind of a bizarre analogy, but it really works. He said that people are no longer going into the concert hall or into the auditorium to hear the band. They're just going in to yell and scream at the stage and wave their hands in the air and scream some more and then turn around and go home. And that, I thought that was kind of an interesting analogy because it's true. You see, we're living in a world now where it's like waving a bunch of flags. People, and this is what troubles me, Joe, is well-meaning people are grabbing a meme off Twitter. And you could almost argue that anything on Twitter without a supporting document, and this includes, by the way, supporting YouTube videos, many of which are made by just simply conglomerating a bunch of memes together and adding some optics, and then boom, you've got a little mini doc on YouTube. So for example, I'm looking at Judicial Watch's recent tweet. Now, this is an example of a very good, solid tweet. It says, Judicial Watch uncovered State Department docs showing the Clinton-linked Podesta group run by Tony Podesta, brother of John Podesta, who became White House counselor and Clinton's 2016 campaign chair, worked on behalf of the pro-Kremlin Ukrainian political group Party of Regions. That's the name of the group. And then there's an extensive document written by Judicial Watch linked in that tweet. That, in my opinion, is an example of a comprehensive tweet that is using Twitter to its ultimate power. Now, this tweet has 1,000 retweets at this time and now 1,500 likes. An example of a worthless tweet is a picture of Hillary Clinton that looks like a wicked witch with a green face and a big nose, and she's got a broom and she's flying around on it, and she's got a bunch of kids on a dog leash strung around behind her, and it says jail bait, Clinton is a pedophile. And that's all the tweet is. Well, really, Joe, okay, that it might be good for a giggle if that's your type of dark humor. But what it really is it's kind of just worthless grist in the rumor mill. And I don't know, maybe I'm being a little harsh because I guess memes kind of have their place in framing the conversation, but they themselves, Joe, are not news. And that's what happened last week with Tucson to a degree. And so just in a quick nutshell, I want our listeners to please consider this, and they can go back and they can look at the final video that Vets for Child Rescue, Vets the numeral 4 childrescue.org put out on Saturday morning. That can be found on Craig Sawyer's YouTube channel as well as at vetsforchildrescue.org. And the title is something like Vets for Child Rescue, the final word on Tucson. This is a wrap it up or something like that. So last week what happened, Joe, is one primary digital print platform, which is the Gateway Pundit, Jim Hoft, been a guest on the show a few times, Alicia Powell, a regular contributor to the Hagmann Report. They worked together at the Gateway Pundit to bring articles out last week, one of the only digital print platforms that did, probably the biggest. And then the Hagmann Report worked last week to bring the broadcast capability to amplify through our show, the evening program, the story as best we could vet it. And what happened is you have a little group of reporters. You've got Alicia Powell, Jim Hoft, the people at the Gateway Pundit. You've got Doug Hagmann, Joe Hagmann, myself, and the people at the Hagmann Report trying to do our best, really trying, having a meeting every night before we go on air to talk about what we can prove, what is not proven at this time, what is clickbait, what is inflaming people's passions. And we're trying our best, listeners, to put ourselves in your shoes. And what I mean by that is to say, okay, we're getting vitriolic emails. I got a couple people sent things to me last week that were just, basically they were designed to hurt my feelings is what they were designed to do. And by the way, listeners, if that was your goal, well, you succeeded. You smacked me across the nose and you've never even met me. Why? Because I guess I would have the audacity to, over the last couple of years, engage in this stuff. And I don't even feel like I chose it. I feel like the Lord led me into it. But enough about that. We've got a good group of people who are trying their best. Then we've got not one, Joe, but two organizations who are trying to do their best. And that would be the Border Patrol veterans. I can't remember their name, Joe, but when Veterans on Patrol, when that Lewis Michael Meyer, Arthur Michael Lewis Meyer, whatever his name is, when he made the initial call a week ago last Tuesday, this is almost 2 weeks ago tomorrow, when he made the initial call, he couldn't call Craig Sawyer at Vets for Child Rescue. He had to call a third party to get to Craig Sawyer. So he didn't have direct connection with Craig. Now, that's no big deal. But the third party then informed Craig. So now we're dealing with secondhand information going to Craig Sawyer. He goes through his entire procedure. I'm not even going to unpack that today because that's up to Craig. There's plenty out there on the internet now, and I need to be careful that I don't accidentally divulge things that Craig has told me in private. So this all started, Joe, with a lie, with disinformation. And why Vets on Patrol would do this, I do not know. I will say, to Craig's credit, that he has been very level-headed, very sort of neutrally buoyant about this. He
he had the same sentiments.
Go ahead, buddy.
He had the same sentiments last Thursday as we did, the same cautions, and I think the first words out of his mouth when you asked him about this was, "Be careful. This is not what it seems. This is not what it is being reported as."
Hit the brakes is what he said. He said, "Tap the brakes or hit the brakes." And at the end of the day, Joe, this is what I want listeners to learn from this, the same as I have, or perhaps you have, and that is that we're all on the same team here. Remember, we've got a whole huge group of our fellow Americans who are not on the same team. They're on the Hillary Clinton team. They're on the reprobate Antifa pro-abortion team, and that's not us. So, but within our own team, Joe, we were being taken to task, and probably still are today, for not reporting effectively what a lot of really well-meaning people on Twitter and Facebook wanted to hear. But that's not our job. If we run amok and we just become basically a tabloid news program, then we're going to lose listeners by the tens of thousands.
Yeah, and that's not our style.
They're not. The reason people listen to us is because we're trying.
And that's not our style. Is just to go whichever way the wind blows. And to, I mean, there are some things that you just, obviously, I'm one that believes that all the truth should come out. But like I said earlier, and I don't want people to misunderstand what I said, each and every person can make a difference from behind their computer screen. Just not, I mean, when you're doing an investigation, and let's use what we used to do, private investigation into workers' compensation fraud or insurance fraud, there was only a certain amount of work you could do on the internet. You had to go out there, you had to get on your feet, you had to put your work boots on, and you had to go knock on doors. You had to go interview people. You had to ask questions. You had to interview witnesses. There's much more to the investigating than just sitting behind the computer and connecting dots. So when I said that earlier, I wasn't trying to say that you couldn't make a difference online. I'm saying when you're doing a real, live, legitimate investigation, there's only so much of a difference, only so much dots you can connect behind a computer screen. You have to put the footwork in. You have to go out there, knock on the doors, ask the questions, interview witnesses, compile as much evidence as possible. So it's a multi-pronged tactic of investigating, and you can't just do the one side of it. So that's exactly what I meant. And when we see so many people, which is great, online advocating for pedophilia to be brought down, for the deep state to be exposed, that's all well and good, but at some point we need to turn into action rather than just pointing out the problems. We need to work towards solutions rather than just identifying problems, because that only goes so far. And, one of the things that would take a lot of problems out of everybody's life, I was talking to John about this earlier, and I still want to talk about this today. Imagine if everybody had $20 million, or even say $50 million in the bank. The point is, you have the financial freedom to do whatever in life it is you want to do. What would that thing be that you do if you had the financial freedom to do so? Would we continue to be doing what we were doing? I say yes, we would continue to be doing what we're doing, regardless of how much money we had in the bank. But,
we would. Joe, I want to apologize again to our listeners. I don't know what the problem is here today, but we've had, and Joe, you can attest to this, we've had a lot of problems with Skype just in general over the past 2 or 3 weeks. Some of the shows that we did last week and the week before, we had to run around like our hair was on fire in the studio, reconnecting guests, connecting through VoIP, connecting on their landlines, cell phones. I mean, we were one step away from sending smoke signals. So so Skype has been a little bit burdensome lately. And Joe, before we go into the 20 million thing, we got about 20 minutes left of the show, give or take. I need to clarify something quickly. And Joe, be patient with me because this is important. One of the listeners to our program, and they're going to know who they are if they are still a listener to the program, lit me up really hard in public over the weekend. And they actually posted this comment several weeks back, but I didn't see it until over the weekend. And what they did, Joe, is, and I've seen this happen many times, and it's why I'm addressing it today. First, they took me to task, claiming that because my IMDb was scrubbed by the powers that be in Hollywood, that I never worked a day in Hollywood in my life, and I don't know what I'm talking about. That's number one. Number two, and by the way, I'm going to make a point here. This is not about self-defense. Number two, they called me a neophyte, suggesting that I just showed up in the new media, day before yesterday, and somehow magically, I don't know, duped Doug and Joe Hagmann into bringing me into the organization. Again, not being aware of the fact that I've known these gentlemen for coming up on 6 years, but they really took me to task, and they were very mean-spirited about it, Joe. But there's a couple lessons to be learned, and I want to kind of give our listeners some insight here. With all due respect, if anybody out there, if you hate what we do, if you disagree with us politically, if you're pro-abortion, if you're pro-Hillary, if you're pro-Bernie, or you think we should all give our guns back to the government or whatever, that's fine. But when you email us or when you post publicly, particularly if you post on an article that I wrote that's really technically my intellectual property, if you're going to do that, then just be who you are and say that. Just have enough integrity to say, I'm on the left and you guys are full of beans and I don't want to hear it. But don't pretend to be one of us and then try to snip and snipe and parse at us based on unfounded allegations, because, Joe, the reality is, and you know this to be true, given the number of years we've worked together and the hundreds of conversations we've had about it, you can't take 15 years of any man's career and in one snarky paragraph or two dismiss it and say this person is just full of jive and they don't know what they're talking about. You're not talking about 2 or 3 or 4 shows. In my particular case, you're talking about almost 16 years of a resume. And so I got really upset, Joe, by this. And again, I'll say if the writer of this communique, if it was designed just to basically hurt my feelings, well, guess what? Congratulations, man. You did a great job. You've never met me. I'm over here doing my best, but you did it. You knocked it out of the park to hurt somebody's feelings who's just trying to do a good job. But that aside, there have been questions throughout the time I've been with Hagmann Report about what the veracity of my whole Hollywood thing is. I put out a tweet over the weekend, Joe. People can find it on my account. I simply took a screenshot of a couple of studio passes, one of my more recent union cards, and I put that out for the world to see so that it's just one optic, but people can understand that, yes, I mean, in one of the studio IDs, it's obvious I'm 10 or 15 years younger than I am right now. So I chose those specifically, and I want to allay any suspicion people have about who I am or where I come from. Joe, you can attest, given our many, many conversations. You've seen everything from studio IDs to the different props around my house, etc. And I'm saying this because
you worked in Hollywood. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, even before you and I had met personally, I was sending you little interesting things from time to time that I fished out of prop houses, etc. But I'm saying that not again. This is not about a hyper self-defense mode, and we're going to get into this fun talk about $20 million. I'm saying it to say this. There's huge division and backbiting and backstabbing from the people who are supposed to be on our side. I got an email on Thursday or Friday night last week from someone who purports to be on our side, and we were able to patch things up over the weekend because I took the time to respond in a thoughtful manner to this email. But, Joe, this email was knocking me upside the head for being associated with Craig Sawyer. And I'm borrowing this from Lionel, but I really want people to think about this because we will all grow. All of us will become better, more mature human beings if we think about things this way. And by the way, I'm guilty of this, Joe, so I'm talking first and foremost to the man in the mirror. Before we start calling John Podesta a pedophile, or saying Jon Robberson never worked in Hollywood, or saying Craig Sawyer is in it for the money. There's a big tweet going around right now saying that Honeybee, Melissa Zachariah, is a profiteer. Well, I've got news for you all. Honeybee works a regular job so that she can do what she does, Joe, in defense of defenseless kids. So when I see something like that, suggesting that Honeybee is quote-unquote in it for the money, and they're shooting the same cannons at Tracy Beans, I want to laugh because this is what people need to stop and consider. Don't get sucked into the Twitter thing. You don't, with all due respect, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but if you don't know somebody, be very, very cautious before you start firing cannons at them because you don't know them. And I'll give you a case in point, Joe. It so happens that Tracy knows Roseanne. Okay, they speak on a weekly basis. I don't know Roseanne. So were I to start blowing up Roseanne on Twitter because of this, that, and the other thing, and Roseanne, by the way, said 15 years ago on a late night talk show that she sold her soul to the devil. Well, that has been one of my primary topics on dozens of new media platforms over the past couple of years. So here's a good example. If I were to start tagging Roseanne to tweets and saying, well, you're a reprobate, you sold your soul to Satan, you're one of Satan's minions, you're part of Legion, blah, 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 blah. That may or may not be true. It's something that a known comedian said like 15 years ago on a late night talk show. I asked, well, I don't want to get, I got to be careful. I don't get too personal here, but it turns out that she was being facetious, that was satire. But the reason I use it as an example, Joe, is I don't know Roseanne. So for me to blast her and blow her up, it would be wildly inappropriate because up until 4 or 5 days ago, I didn't know that we have, in fact, a mutual friend. And this would circle right back around and it would drop in my lap within just a couple of days. And that's what people need to stop and take a breath and realize is that somebody like President Barack Obama, president in air quotes, he's put himself in the crosshairs. He was the purported president of the United States. So he gets what he's got coming. But in general, we need to be very cautious about saying, for example, because an individual, Joe, doesn't like the way the Tucson investigation is shaping up because they want to believe that vets on patrol are a bunch of great guys and they're just veterans and they just found this thing and everybody's on the same page and we're just going to protect the children who, by the way, were never even discovered on site by law enforcement or vets for child rescue. That was a lie. So because people don't like that conclusion, Joe, they immediately jump to Craig Sawyer is a profiteer. He's a filmmaker using children to finance his films. He's a this, he's a that. Same, and then because Honeybee is connected with Craig professionally, now she's a profiteer too. Oh, and let's take Jon Robberson and we'll throw him in the mix because he's someone called me a neophyte. Well, if you call a few thousand hours of broadcast time being a neophyte, I guess I'll work really hard to become an amateur.
Well, look,
but I'm getting long-winded. You get the point.
You're always one thing I've learned, and it's very unfortunate in this business, is that no matter what you do, no matter how well you do it, and probably the better you do it, the more you're going to get this, people attacking you for any and everything they can.
But why do they do it, Joe?
What?
Why do they do it? Especially if they're purporting to be on our side.
Yeah, some of them do it because they think they're doing the right thing by exposing something they think they know. I think many of them do it to create and cause division. We see the multi-pronged ways that the deep state, the globalists, are able to infiltrate and just completely obscure and divide and tear apart even our own country here in America. We're talking about like 100-year plan of infiltrating and destroying from the inside out. Look at how many, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Look at all the connections between the Hollywood, the media, entertainment industry, the mainstream media, and the CIA and intelligence agencies there are. This is the whole mainstream is a big psyop designed to divide, distract, and divide us. And when we have alternative media platforms out there that are trying to get to the truth, you'll never hear a mainstream news organization tell you that we are fighting a spiritual battle of good versus evil, and you have to pick a side, and give you the options and show you Christianity and Jesus, and he died for our sins. You can gain salvation through belief in Christ Jesus. This is never the primary and most important topic, is never talked about in these circles. Christianity and Jesus and Christians as a whole are mocked and ridiculed in films and TV, in the media industry, in online communities. And this is the line that we are going, ultimately, whether people want to believe it or not, what it talks about in the tribulation, the beast system, all must worship the beast and get a mark, or else you will not be able to buy or sell. That's a battle of good versus evil, and we are in this battle now. So you have always all those who believe in Christ Jesus shall be persecuted, and this is another way that happens, through censorship, through infiltration, through the backbiting, through the division. The enemy will divide any and every which way he can, and if he can get those inside the alternative media to be divided against themselves, what chance do we have against a media and entertainment industrial complex that is run by the intelligence agencies in the highest levels and powers of government.
Many of whom are Luciferian in their spiritual practices, or lack thereof. Joe, I just thought of something while you were dropping that commentary punctuated my rant very nicely. But, I just thought of this. I never thought of this before. Can you imagine, like, I don't know, a couple of years from now, maybe we're getting eviscerated. We're getting all these vitriolic emails and people are just smashing us left and right. And by the way, we are human beings. I mean, the stuff is hurtful. Just because we go on the air every day doesn't mean that we don't have the same feelings everybody else does. Like calm down, everybody. Try to be a little bit nicer. It really would be appropriate. But Joe, imagine this. We're getting emails in the studio and our private accounts and whatever of people lambasting us because we're not taking the mark. And yet they'll still pretend to be us or pretend to be with us on our team. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, but this is the problem. The more we see censorship, the more we see these algorithms, coming across on YouTube and Facebook and social media, we're seeing the internet is completely under attack. In Europe, they've just made it illegal through these new laws that they have passed on the internet to memes are now illegal due to copyright restrictions in Europe. And we are looking at will the internet have these same kind of restrictions over here? Can you do that with the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment? Well, obviously, these people have been attacking the Constitution, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, on and on and on and on. And they are attempting to break this up. And there's this satanic global hive mind that is out there. And it seems like it's attached to the liberal and to the... It's not a left-right thing. All the establishment seems to be connected to this hive mind. The only true division really out there is, are you a Christian? Are you a moral person, or are you not? That's really the only division, but they try to contextualize it and frame it in this left versus right, Republican, conservative versus liberal, Trump versus anti-Trump. And it's really only right versus wrong. And the right is the living by the morals and the guidelines that are laid out to us in Scripture. That's how we have always lived, or for most of society, and that's how this country was founded. But we've gotten so far away from that, John. And I'm afraid that we're never going to get back to that either. When you look at the technology that is going to be implemented, and there's a great piece. I posted this on Hagmann Report today. Will YouTube block the Bible? I know the very question sounds outlandish, but in light of recent developments, it's only fair to ask. Will YouTube block the Bible? If you followed the LGBT outcry surrounding our recent video on the Bible and homosexuality, you're aware that YouTube came under tremendous criticism for running ads for our video, along with the one from AFD on some LGBT YouTube channels. And this is from stream.org, stream, STREAM. And it's titled, Will YouTube Block the Bible? YouTube noted that over the past few days, we've heard many questions around monetization and how ads are served against videos by LGBTQ creators. We know this has been both confusing and painful, and want you to know that we hear you. Here, YouTube was explaining why many LGBTQ videos were demonetized, something that has also produced an angry response. Perhaps YouTube will change this policy soon. We shall see. But anyways, it goes on to talk about the demonetization and the censorship of certain videos, like can you be gay and Christian, and videos that argue along those lines. They're demonetizing and taking those and banning some of those videos. But the overall question, will YouTube eventually block the Bible because it does not line up with the views of this leftist satanic mindset? And that's a question that needs to be asked. And I think, yes, it will be, in as much as it's possible, YouTube will work to keep the Bible off of their network. Now, I don't know. Well, there's so many channels out there that just read the scripture with no personal input. But the question is, are those scriptures, which the global elitist in disagreement with, will those be removed from YouTube? And I say yes, they will.
Wow. Well, Joe, over the weekend, Jack Dorsey, the proprietor of Twitter, himself a questionable character. But over the weekend, he apologized for eating a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And by the way, the $20 million idea, let's make this fun, Joe, because we're running out of time. Listeners, email us. And Joe, tell them where to send the email. But email us what you would do with $20 million. And tomorrow we can address this, and maybe we can incorporate a few of your emails in. Just make sure you give us permission in the email to read it. I know what I would do right now, Joe, so I don't need 24 hours to cook it up. But Jack Dorsey apologizes for eating a chicken sandwich because the company's owned by Christians. So Joe, what you're saying imagine just a retiree who reads scripture into a YouTube channel and they get shut down. Are we that far away from it?
Yeah, I saw that headline, John. I did not read into the article at all, but let's get into the mentality behind this, because this is kind of crazy. So here you have the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey or whatever his name is. He eats a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and this is what the article says. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey on Sunday expressed regret over eating a Chick-fil-A sandwich because of the chicken company's CEO's personal views on gay marriage. Dorsey tweeted a screenshot from his phone that showed the purchase he made at a Chick-fil-A using a mobile application. After a liberal backlash, however, Dorsey apologized. The owner of Twitter apologized for eating at the popular fast food restaurant because the owners are Christian and support the biblical definition of a family. Wow. And remember, say? Joe, you said something. I'm going to make this my final comment for today and throw the last few minutes back to you. But Joe, you said something today that reiterates what Alicia Powell said to me offline over the weekend. Alicia Powell, who's now writing for the Gateway Pundit, doing great work, by the way. Joe, the hivist, collectivist mentality is like a cancerous form of thinking, and it does not know political boundaries. I really want to make sure our listeners get that. That's a good takeaway from our show today. It's not a left-right thing. It's something that happens when you don't lean into the truth that is, frankly, following Christ. Look, listeners, do the best job you can. It's not easy. It's a sanctification process. I have days where I feel very strong as a Christian. I have other days where I'm like almost in the fetal position, sucking my thumb and calling on the name of the Lord. But do the best you can, because like you said, Joe, the collectivist, hivist mentality, what does it do? It strips your personal liberty. It drives you to the point of insanity where you're apologizing over eating a chicken sandwich, for crying out loud. And if you give that personal liberty away, then you're effectively giving to the world what you're supposed to be giving to Jesus Christ. Yeah, and it just shows you the kind of atmosphere that we live in when you have a CEO of one of the largest social media companies on the internet apologizing for daring to purchase a sandwich from a Christian-owned business. I mean, and meanwhile, you have people applauding Robert De Niro saying F Trump on live TV, getting a standing ovation. This is the world that Hollywood wants you to live in. The debased, disgusting country. I saw a couple of headlines that, are made to make us really angry, and did rightfully so make me angry. On Friday, InfoWars had a story about how transgender boys are breaking all the records and winning in women's track and field high school events. Well, of course they are. It's like the men who transition to women and fight ladies in a UFC ring. Of course they're going to dominate. And then there's this article on Drug Report. Pregnant man and flower power. Or no, that's not it. Where is it? The first man to have a baby. The guy was a woman. Apparently had transgendered after they got pregnant. And now they're trying to package a story as the movie from Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 90s about a man having a baby. It's completely disgusting. Just because you turned yourself into a man doesn't make you a man. And there's only two genders, male and female. And whatever you're born with biologically is the gender you are. There are no two ways about it. But you have teachers losing their jobs for saying that. You have students getting suspended or expelled for saying that. What kind of crazy world do we live in? We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.